Anganatimnanda Shanganagana Sarakya Chaksurin Miritanyana Tashmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanyamanovistam Stapitam Yanabhutarim Sayamrupakaramayam Darati Swaparantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Siyata Parakamaram Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Stam Sri Rupam Sagadadam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sadevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shivishakhanvitam Stam. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinu Bandhu Jigapate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radhikantu Namostute Jayatam Surito Pango Mama Mater Mater Gati Matsavasha Param Boja Radhana Madhana Mohanam Sriman Rasarasaram Vivam Sivada Karsan Vaneshanu Gopinata Sri Chaitanya Divyad Brindaranya Kalpadrumada Srimad Radnagara Shima Sanisto Shri Shri Radha Shira Govindadev Prashtadabhi Sarvamanushmarami Mukam Karoti Bacharam Pangung Langayate Giram Yatkripatam Hambane Sri Karuniratarinam Mukam Kavit Vikariyan Savarashmarani Panga Girlanga de Deka Kari Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Dev Maheshwara Guru Shaksha Parabrahma Tashmai Sri Guruve Namah Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutare Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tenam Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharini Nirvishesa Sanivari Praskata Desara Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhakta Vindam. Pranams, obeisances to all the exalted devotees out there, including Brent and Bhai Bobby, who have jumped on Facebook, as well as Rob Prabhuji, who's over here on Zoom with me. It's Wisdom Wednesday. We're at in the 9th chapter, the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And if you were with us yesterday, good morning, Britta, Hare Krishna. If you were with us yesterday, we talked about how it was that Chitraketu, through no fault of his own, was cursed by Shiva's consort, Parvati. It was interesting because Chitraketu had had an incident earlier where a son of his was brought back to life. When that son came back to life, Chitraketu was overjoyed to have his son back initially, but then the son said that, revealed that he had been an enemy of Chitraketu in his last life, and that son had taken birth as his son in that life, and then been poisoned by the jealous co-wives. And this was all the arrangement of fate and karma for the enemy of Chitraketu from his past life to get back at him. So when Chitraketu realized all there was to it, his material shneha, his material affection, dissipated in a moment. I was reading a verse the other day in the 10th canto, where I think it's Maitreya or Uddhava, says that Lord captures everyone through his illusory energy, Maya. And the way Maya works is through affection, is through shneha. That's what keeps us imprisoned in this material world. It is affection for the passing, temporary family members. Kunti also says, Ata Vishvesha Vishatmam. She refers to Krishna as the soul of the universe, the Lord of the universe. Krishna is that person from whom everything and everyone comes. There isn't any quality in created beings that does not exist originally in the Lord. So when you connect with the Lord, who is the source of everything, you don't feel like you're missing anything. When you connect with the energies of the Lord, a tiny particle of the Lord, then you're missing pretty much everything. You're getting enough glimpse of the Lord to increase your hankering and your appetite. But most people try to satisfy that hankering, that hole in their lives, by jumping from one partner to another partner to another partner, going from one particle of the Lord's energy to another particle of the Lord's energies to another particle. This wife doesn't satisfy, they get tired of this husband, they get tired of this husband, so they go to another one, another. So these are just particles bumping together. The only way you can become really satisfied is connect to the whole. The whole is the only one that has it all. Doesn't matter how good your spouse is, they're only going to have, at most, the best spouse is only going to have about 80% of what you think you need. But Krishna has 1,000% of what you think you need, 1,000,000%. Krishna is overflow. Otherwise, everybody else will fall short. And it's not anybody's particular fault. You marry someone, you have these expectations that this tiny particulate is going to fill the God-sized hole in your life. And that person is just not going to be able to do that. Because of your unrealistic expectations of other jivas, of other living entities, 50% of all marriages in America end in divorce. It's because of the unrealistic expectation. You know, we have no right to expect of our spouse to give us everything we want. They'll always fall short. There'll always be things to point out. There'll always be things to criticize. So whenever you have a wedding with just two people, it's pretty much doomed. It's going to go on under a cloud of declining interest. You have to incorporate the Lord of all beings into the equation. The marriage, the domestic situation has to include three, not two. So when the couples serve the Lord side by side, when they tap into the supreme personality of Godhead, none of us are supreme. We just reflect a tiny bit of God's power, his beauty, his wealth, his glory, his fame, his humility. And we can never satisfy each other. That's not possible. But you put the supreme there in that equation, and both husband and wife, children, grandchildren, the whole dynasty can become blessed thereby. The Kunti Dev prays, Atavi Shesha Vishwatmam. She addresses the Lord as the soul of the universe. None of us are attracted to anybody else except that attraction is ultimately an attraction for Krishna. If you like somebody's qualities, it means you're going to like Krishna even more. You're going to like Krishna 10 million times more because he has those qualities unlimitedly. He has them eternally. There is none more attractive than Krishna. That's why Krishna means attractive. It means the all attractive. Shmeran Bangi Traya Prachitam Sati Vishnanuditam Bam Sni Nirishtara Kushanam Chandakanam Govindatyam Haritanam Isha Keshir Tiparan Maprekshashtavadiri Sake Bandhu Sange Sirangam. One devotee said, tongue in cheek, said, if you're attracted to family, friends, country, then whatever you do, do not go and see that young boy standing on the bank of the Yamuna, bathed in the light of the moon, with a peacock feather stuck in his crown, a quizzical Mona Lisa smile on his face, and his flute to his lips. He's a thief. He will steal away all other attraction. All other attractions will pale in comparison to the flow of your attraction to Krishna. Kunti also says in the same set of prayers, first of all, she says, free me from the attraction to so-called relatives and family lives. And in those days, a woman like Kunti had two areas of attraction, her paternal home and the home of her husband. The lady would live in the home of her father and brothers until marriageable age. The marriage would be performed in the paternal home. And after the marriage, the bride would go with many of her favorite girlfriends in procession to the home of the groom, where she would live the rest of her life, produce children, grandchildren, so on and so forth. So the two areas of affection are the paternal and the family into which you'd marry. So Kunti says, Atavi Shesha Vishnu Vishamurtu Shnea Pashami Jam Chindi, cut off my ties of affection, Dridashu, Vrishashu, Pandashu. She was married into the family of Pandu. That was her husband's family. And she was born in the family of Vrishashu. That was her paternal. So she asked that those two ties of affection be cut off. And then she says, Twayamenanya Vishya Matir Madhu. Matir means consciousness. Madhu means sweet. Krishna consciousness, the flow of consciousness to Krishna is, first of all, it's natural. Second of all, it's in you. It's not something external that has to be searched for or found or discovered or stumbled upon. It's already there. It's unlimited. It's sweet. It's natural. So she says, just as the Ganges with its sweet, sweet water springing from the purity of the Himalayan foothills, flows down naturally and inexorably to the sea, 1,500, 2,000 miles. So let the flow, right now our flow is going here and there to other particulates, to other infinitesimal living beings. It's indirectly worshiping the Lord, but we're not getting the happiness, the satisfaction that we hanker for. We're only getting, as it were, a drop of water. We're like thirsty men in the desert, and all we're getting from family, love, and society is just a drop of water, which is hardly enough to satisfy a thirsty person. We require literally a Ganges river to satisfy us. And so Kunti Trayamenanya Visha Matir Madhu Pate, let my consciousness flow just like the sweet waters of the Ganges flow from the Himalayan heights and drain 2,000 miles later into the Bay of Bengal. So and what are the characteristics? It is unstoppable and it is uninterruptible. So similarly, let my attraction flow. And as the Ganges comes from a little tiny place, a little tiny source, and it gets momentum, the force of gravity gives it more momentum. It also, tributaries flow into it. So it starts relatively small, but as it moves along its course, as it progresses, other tributaries dump into it and it gets bigger and stronger and faster. So she says, like, let the flow of my affection increase in velocity, increase in depth, and increase in rati badam bashangatam. So Chitraketu had given up his family affection. He'd been immediately and abruptly divested of any illusion that there's happiness in limited family life without Krishna consciousness. He was liberated. He turned his back on his kingdom, everything. And he was actually traveling in a liberated state in an aerial vehicle. And he passed the place where, and he was in a secluded, he was going off away from the cities, away from civilization, to more deeply delve into Krishna consciousness. And he happened to see Lord Shiva talking, giving a Bhagavatam class to some great saints and sages. And Parvati was sitting in his lap. And he thought, Shiva's so great. Who else could talk on the sublime, subtle, pure topics of the Srimad Bhagavatam with his wife, who's the most beautiful woman within this material creation, sitting on his lap and not be agitated? He just laughed out of appreciation. As you know, Parvati mistook that for a derisory laugh, and she cursed Chitraketu to take birth as a demon. Chitraketu, you can imagine, he's liberated. He's on his way to the spiritual world. Whoops. Okay, there's a little snafu here. There's a little curveball out of nowhere. Can imagine how upset we'd be. When we get caught in a traffic jam, we're fit to be tied. We start chanting the names of the Lord, but not in devotion. Not in devotion. We start raising our limbs in the air, but not like we do in kirtan. We start waving to people with the one finger salute. How upset we are over the slightest things. And yet here's Chitraketu, he's already liberated, practically speaking. And now, talk about a reversal. He's on his way to the spiritual world, and all of a sudden it's a 180 U-turn. He's going to take birth as a demon. You'd think he would be at least crestfallen, chagrined, taken aback, resentful, at a loss as to what to do or what to say. He didn't even miss a beat. He didn't. There's so much satisfaction. It's like an ocean. Apurya manamachara pratisham shamudana provision yadvat kamayam sasanti mapnoti. The peace that a devotee knows, being grounded in love of the supreme personality of Godhead, who is like an ocean of qualities. That peace has a depth to it that cannot be disturbed by any temporary material circumstances. The depth of Maharaj Chitraketu's realization and peace and fulfillment was so deep, so vast, that this reversal of fortune didn't even lose a beat. He accepted the fault. He said, I'm sorry, Mataji, I had no intention of insult. Rather, I was glorifying Lord Shiva. And Lord Shiva himself told Parvati, he has not made an offense. He is not an offender. Don't mistake this for an offense. Nevertheless, Chitraketu said, it's my fault. I'm sorry. I hope that you will forgive me. And as far as taking birth in a demoniac family is concerned, he did not see Parvati as the cause of that. Parvati was the immediate cause, but devotees see the remote cause as being the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We have so many stories of Mars Pariksit draping the sage with a snake. So many instances where devotees seem to act uncharacteristically. And this is because of the plan of the Lord. The Lord wants to bring about a wonderful result. And so apparently he causes the devotee to stumble or to commit some breach of etiquette. Vaishnavera kriya mudre vigne na bhujya, which reinforces the statement that nobody can understand the activities of the pure devotees. So Parvati is a pure devotee. Chitraketu is a pure devotee. Chitraketu appears to have insulted Lord Shiva. Parvati appears to have lost it and cursed Chitraketu. But we have to see that behind all of it, these are pure devotees after all, and they don't do anything that's not at the prompting of Krishna. This is Krishna's arrangement. And in fact, we're going to have a great story out of this. In fact, I've spent so much time setting the scene that I may not even be able to get to the actual story itself. We'll see what happens. Okay, so when Lord Shiva saw the equanimity with which Chitraketu accepted this 180-degree reversal of fortune, he did two things. One thing is, he kind of warns Parvati. He says, don't make a habit of going around cursing pure devotees. Don't jump to any conclusions. If it's a pure devotee, just hold off, give him the benefit of the doubt. Api ched characharo bhajatem. Krishna says, even if my devotees perform something that's prohibited by normal social circumstances and societies, don't make the mistake of rushing to condemn them. Don't judge them by the same standard. That's not a pass for anyone to claim to be a pure devotee and act in any darn way. But pure devotees are those who are always engaged in the service of the Lord. In the course of that service, sometimes the Lord will prompt them to do something which we can't understand. And so Shiva says, when it comes to pure devotees, you need to be very, very, very careful. You need to not make a habit of going around and cursing people whose practice is chanting the holy names of the Lord. And Shiva says, to giving credit where credit is due, you are the most beautiful woman within creation, not only the most beautiful, but Parvati is a great ascetic as well. She's hardly second to Lord Shiva. She also, as Shiva goes off and meditates for hundreds of years alone, Parvati also does the same thing on her own. They're both great, great ascetics. And yet Shiva says your beauty and your asceticism today is defeated. It's eclipsed by the tolerance and the cheerfulness and the positivity of Mars Chitraketu. Although you tried to push him down by the way that he received your curse, by the way that he received this unexpected turn of fortune, this reversal, he has defeated your formidable beauty and your formidable austerity. In fact, I think we can conclude that the only reason why Parvati doesn't have a severe and negative reaction is because she's the consort of the greatest of all Vaishnavas, Vaishnavanam Sambhu, Lord Shiva. And so there's an immunity there, there's a dispensation there. So, but Lord Shiva makes no bones. He's not at all ambiguous or ambivalent about telling her that by tolerating your curse, with equanimity, with cheerfulness, by even accepting the fault, although he is not faulty at all, he's accepted the fault, he's accepted the responsibility. He says, in doing this, he has excelled the glory of your beauty, your asceticism, and your power to curse him. And what happened? Although she apparently on one level, cursed him to go from being liberated to taking birth in a demoniac family, actually, it wasn't a curse at all. By the grace of the Lord, it was a blessing. The Lord Shiva says to Parvati, I can impartially judge that this devotee Chitraketu has defeated you and your excellences simply on the strength of becoming a devotee of the Lord. There's nothing else that one has to aspire for or try to accomplish other than putting oneself right at the lotus feet of the Lord and doing any sort of menial service. In that position, being protected by the shelter of the Lord, one is compared to a tree. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that one who serves the Lord in humility, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street, one becomes more tolerant than the tree. In such a state of mind, one can serve the Lord constantly without disturbance, without interruption, without being upset. And one, in the course of serving the Lord, can chant the names of the Lord day and night. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Chitraketu then went ahead and took his next birth as a huge demon named Vrtrasura. Now, how that came about will set the scene, and we may actually have to reserve telling the full story till next Monday. Indra was a devotee. Both Chitraketu and Indra, as well as Vrtrasura, they were all devotees. But Indra is what we call a mixed devotee. He's a devotee, but he's also attached to the perks, to the opulence that comes from devotional service. He lives on the heavenly planets. It's considered that the heavenly planets are no more ideal for going back to home, back to Godhead, than are the hellish planets. The hellish planets are quite obviously not ideal because so much suffering and misery there, almost nonstop. But the heavenly planets are no more conducive. Well, maybe a little bit more, because at least the living entities are pious. But the problem is they're enjoying the fruits of their previous pious activities. And that enjoyment is on a level that is so intoxicating, it's practically impossible to remember the shortcomings of material life. The lifespan is hundreds of thousands of years. The level of enjoyment, the standard of living is far, far greater than ours. And so it's very easy to become enamored with the heavenly planets, the delights there. In fact, one can come to think that one is already in the spiritual world. Can you imagine a lifespan of 100,000 years? If someone said, True, you're going to live 100,000 years, I would stop thinking about death. I would stop thinking about the imperative of spiritual life. It's good that we only live 100 years, because with death is always right there. Death can tap us on the shoulder at any time. That is an incentive, because there's an expiry date, there's a time period, and that creates some urgency and therefore intensity in our devotional service. But if someone told me, True, you're going to live for 100,000 years, there's going to be beautiful gardens, you're not going to get sick, you're going to be very comely, you're going to be surrounded by comely girls, then I wouldn't be so concerned about my ultimate liberation. For us, 100,000 years, you say immortality, 100,000 years, you say, what's the difference? Practically speaking, from our relative limited selfish point of view, 100,000 years of immortality, what's the difference? Either way, we're going to put it out of our mind. We're not going to think about death anymore. So Indra is a devotee, Vrtrasura is a devotee, but Vrtrasura is blessed. He wasn't cursed by Parvati, he was blessed to take birth in a demoniac family where all the shortcomings of the material world are front and center. They're right in your face. So Vrtrasura, if he was liberated before, now he's even more serious about liberation. If he got his comeuppings, if he got his sobriety after his son confessed that his son had been his enemy in his last life, and that sent him off into Krishna consciousness, then this is also even more an inducement to practice and finish up his Krishna consciousness, taking birth in a demoniac species of life. Now, Indra, on the other hand, doesn't have it so bad. From Indra's point of view, he's got the Nandana gardens, he's got the apsaras, he's got the dancing girls, he's got the musicians, he's got the atmosphere, He's got the Soma Rasha. There isn't hardly any misery in Indra's life at all. And he just wants to keep it up. He just wants to continue it. So what happened was how these two devotees ended up confronting each other. So Indra's in his palace, Indraprastha, in the heavenly planets. There's dancing girls, there's singing girls, there's musicians, there's great food, good company. Indra's like in his element. In the revels of the sport, when the palms of all his guests burn with clapping at his chest, said Indra, make his figs and wine, O loving friends of mine, that kind of thing, the revels of the court. So Indra's in the revels of the court, and his guru, Brihaspati, walks in. So you can imagine what Indra's thinking. You know, this is your guru. You know, Yasha Deve Parabhakirata, respect, submission, surrender to the guru is the key for liberation. And yet Indra's thinking, you know, there's a time for that, but this is not the time. I'm not thinking about liberation now. I'm checking out, I'm checking out Urvasi, or I'm checking out like that. You know, what is he doing here at night? It's like shaven-headed, tilak, saffron robe devotee wanders into a nightclub. People look at him like, what are you doing here? You know, this is, that there's a place for that, at the temple, but we're not at the nightclub to get a copy of the Krishna book. And you shouldn't be at the nightclub to give us a copy of the Krishna book. So Indra is on one hand, he notices peripherally that his guru is coming to the party, and he's thinking, what's he doing here? This is, I attend to him at certain times, at certain scheduled times. I support him. I listen to him. I worship him. I serve him. But there are limits, that this is not the time. This is not the place. And so Indra studiously ignored his guru. I mean, what's he going to do? The party's in full thrust. So he's supposed to go and bow down at his guru. And, what's everybody else? What, the dancing's going to stop? The music's going to stop? Everybody's going to feel guilty. So interesting, who is this party pooper coming in here? And he studiously and pointedly, even though he knows, Brihaspati knows that Indra's aware that Brihaspati has come in, and the normal etiquette is whenever you see your guru, you stop everything and bow down. But Indra was not willing to do that. He was in the throes of material sense gratification. He just wished that his guru would turn around and go away so the party could continue on. Well, this was an offense. It was a mental offense. It's explained there are three ways you can offend somebody. There's corporeal, where you offend their body. There's verbal, where you say something insulting to them. And then there's mental, where you omit to give someone welcome or respect. Indra committed a mental offense at his guru, Brihaspati, and Brihaspati turned and left, being quite upset. So it came to Indra realized in due course, once his intoxicated, once he got sober again, he realized, I've made a big mistake, because all of his opulence, his position could be undone by someone as powerful as Brihaspati. It had happened in the past. On previous occasions, Indra had disrespected Brihaspati, and Brihaspati had literally caused him to be defeated by the demons and gone into hiding, and the demons sat on his throne and occupied his palace. So Indra didn't realize that this could possibly be the outcome of his having insulted his guru. So he wanted to rectify it as soon as possible. Tajmad Parivashya Papa Nishkaro Yateta Mitori Doshasha Dishugaram Chajiksharam Bishisharam. It is said, if you do a wrong, don't lose it, don't fall apart, but try to correct it as soon as you can. The longer you leave a wrong unatoned for, the more severe the reaction is going to be. So try to be meek and mild and respectful, and do the proper social etiquette for everybody. Try not to fall, try not to stumble, try not to disrespect anybody corporally, mentally, or verbally. But if you do, correct it ASAP. Because the longer you leave it, the more grave the situation will be. So Indra at least understood this. And so he asked Vishwarup, an associate of his, could Vishwarup's son, Twashta, who happened to have 3 heads, incidentally, do a yagya to counteract Indra's offense at his guru Brihaspati. Twashta agreed to do the yagya. He started the yagya of atonement to remove the offense. Now, the interesting part was Twashta was connected to the demigods on his father's side, but on his mother's side, he had a connection to the Daityas, the demons. Now, he's a pure devotee. Samo mano datsva mano vivikshaham. Devotees don't see in terms of partisanship. Devotees are equal to everyone. They don't see friends, enemies, neutral parties. They do what they can to help everyone indiscriminately. Vashta was situated in this mentality of equanimity. Sadhanam samadarshanam. Samadarshanam. Don't see people in terms of levels and gender and nationality. In fact, you don't categorize people. Sarva parivinirmuktam tattvapan. You don't categorize them in terms of their bodily configuration. You see everyone as Vijay, Vinay, Shampani, Brahmana as a part and parcel of Krishna, whether it's a soul in the body of an elephant, a soul in the body of a Brahmin, a soul in the body of a dog, or soul in the body of a dog eater. You see, you treat everybody with respect because inside of every animated body, there is a part of Krishna. And so respecting others is respecting Krishna in his separated expansion. So what happened was Twashta would do the yagya for the demigods during the day. And then at night, he would do the yagya for the demons. He didn't see any difference between them. He's just at their service. I'm just humble servant. He couldn't say no to the demigods. So he agreed to do the sacrifice on behalf of Indra, but he couldn't say no to the demons either. And so at night he was doing a sacrifice to the demons. Now, when this came to Indra's attention, and again, Indra's a devotee, but he's in certain circumstances whereby the circumstances cause him to forget the mentality, the even not minded mentality of devotee, cause him to become partisan. He's attached to his standard of living, his girlfriends, his food, his surroundings, his residence, and that attachment causes him to act counter to the eternal principles of devotional service. Again, it's what I said, shneha. When you have attachment, when you have affection for family members, members of your inner circle, you have affection for your house, you're attached to your house. There was when we were in Melbourne, Australia, I had rented a temple in St. Kilda in Melbourne, and it was a row house, and there were many other row houses. Separating the row houses was just a little, maybe 12-foot stretch between each row house. There was maybe a 12-foot stretch, some sort of a, I guess you'd call it a patio or a walkway from front to back. Most of them are covered in concrete. So beside this row house that we rented as a temple, there was a little area, a round area of the concrete out of which a skinny little tree grew. Now this tree, being in between 2 row houses in a little crevice, you might say, not more than 12 feet wide, never hardly saw the light of the sun. The sun would shine on it maybe an hour a day. And so it didn't grow very robust. Neither did it have room, again, being packed in. So it was just this really skinny, sort of constipated tree, which went up to the 3rd floor. In fact, Madhavisa, our leader at that time, had a room on the 3rd floor, and he would, when he wanted to dry his kopans, his underwear, he would open the window and hang them on that tree so they could dry out. But when Prabhupada visited Melbourne, he said that the soul in the body of the tree had been the owner of that house in a previous life. He was very attached to the house. And so he had taken his next birth right next to the house as a tree. So that's what we want to avoid. That's where shneha, that's where affection will lead us. And so similarly, Indra's shneha, his affection, his attachment to his standard of living and to his so-called possessions caused him to think in terms of I and mine. This is I, this is who I am, and these are my possessions, my family members, my assets. And outside of that are my enemies, those who would threaten the status quo. And so Indra lost it. Indra totally lost it when he heard that Twashta was empowering his enemies at night. And in a fit of passion, Indra took out his sword and cut off all three of Twashta's heads. Okay, so let's consider Indra's situation. He'd already insulted his guru. He'd made a mental insult to his guru. And in order to counteract that mental insult and preserve his status quo, he hired Twashta to do a sacrifice to wipe that off the books. But then, without that sacrifice having been completed, which means the original offense is not yet atoned for, he now commits the worst level of offense, corporeal. Now, corporeal can be, Brigopati corporeally insulted Lord Vishnu. As you know from the story, Lord Vishnu was lying down and Brigopati put his foot on Vishnu's chest. That was a bodily insult. Well, it's one type of bodily insult to put your foot on one's chest, but it's another type of bodily insult altogether to cut not one or two or three heads off. So Indra had committed, in the interrupting the original sacrifice to counteract the original offense, he'd now in the middle of that interrupted that in order to cut off the three heads of his gurus. And you imagine he's really in super trouble now. So when Vishwarup, the father of Twashta, heard about this, he became very angry and he himself performed a sacrifice. The purpose of Vishwarupa's sacrifice was to produce a demon who would kill Indra. He chanted the mantras, he observed all the rites and rituals to conjure up a demon who would be the enemy of Indra, but Sanskrit is very precise. I was in Goa one time and I was staying, my landlord was named Krishna, it was called Krishna Guest House. So I asked him about learning Hindi one time and he referred me to a retired teacher there, and I would go over to his house every day. We'd have Hindi lessons. And one thing I learned was there are 36 letters in the Hindi alphabet. Now, Hindi differs greatly from English in as much as each one of those 36 letters of the Hindi alphabet, and I've heard Sanskrit is very similar to the Hindi, each one of those 36 letters has a specific sound. There are not multiple sounds for any character of the alphabet. Every character of the alphabet has a specific sound. So the good news is that if you learn the 36 characters of Hindi and the sound, the one particular sound that goes with each and every character, you can learn Hindi. It's just a matter of practice from there. But you can learn the basics in about 10 days. I learned that and I was actually making good progress. And then something happened in my life to derail it. It's called the success of the color festivals. There were several things I was working on, trying to acculture myself. One of them was learning Hindi. But when the color festivals took off in about 2009, everything else was pushed off the board. And this mammoth endeavor has kind of dominated my spare time ever since then. It was only when COVID came and we had to stop the color festivals that I started getting back into learning verses and giving classes and all like that. So again, COVID, you may consider COVID a curse, just like Parvati might consider that she's cursed Vrtrasura when actually she's blessed Vrtrasura. So for others may consider COVID a curse, but for me it was a blessing because it got me back to my original roots in Krishna consciousness. But anyway, my point is that Sanskrit is very specific. There are not two or three ways to say a certain character in the alphabet. Everything is very specific. So when you chant the mantras, and Vishwarupa is chanting the mantras to conjure up an enemy of Indra, he slipped. He slurred one syllable. And the result was that this demon who came out of the fire, he said all the right words. I'll pulverize Indra. He considered himself the brother from the same father as Twashta. He killed my brother. I'm going to let him have it. He's going to pay for this. He said all the right words, but really his heart wasn't into it because Vishwarupa had not emphasized, he had not properly and crisply spoken this one syllable. He kind of slurred it. So the result was, externally, yes, Vrtrasura was an enemy of Indra. He said all the right words. He made all the threats. He went through all the motions, but internally he was a devotee. I mean, how could he hate anybody? He's the same soul as Chitraketu. So he sees everyone equally. He loves everyone equally. So again, the so-called slip on the part of Vishnu was not a slip at all, because in his demoniac incarnation, Chitraketu could not have had enmity towards any other living being. Externally had a demon's body, but he was the same internally. So now we've set up, hopefully we've set the scene on this Wisdom Wednesday. It's 12 minutes past 8. We've set the scene, I hope comprehensively and satisfactory to you, for the confrontation now between these two devotees of the Lord, Indra, who's a mixed devotee and who's living in heaven, and Vrtrasura, who's a pure devotee without any material motivations whatsoever, who is coming from hell. Narayana Parasarve Nakutashana Shargavavaka. And this is perfect. These two personalities perfectly illustrate this quote from the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. When Shiva saw the equanimity, the calm, and even the positivity with which Chitraketu received this so-called curse, he said to Parvati, Narayana Parasarve, there is nobody higher than devotees of the Lord. Nakutashtana, they are not afraid of anything. Narayana Shara Parve Nakutashana Sharga Bhavaga Narakeshu Apitu. For the service of their Lord, they can go to heaven or they can go to hell. If they're in heaven and they're not properly and focusedly serving the Lord, their preferred situation is in hell. Whatever is most conducive for their unalloyed devotional service, that they accept. So we find this principle personified in Indra. Indra's in heaven, but he's forgetful of the Lord. And he's unsatisfied and he's disturbed and he's seeing everything in terms of categories and friends and neutrals, and he's always upset and he's always full of fear. Now, Vrtrasura is in hell, but he is nishkama. He is completely happy, completely satisfied. Whereas Indra is ready to commit any crime in order to preserve his level of sense gratification. Vrtrasura is rushing towards his own death. Vrtrasura is catalyzing his own death, and he ends up coaching Indra in such a way that Indra will kill him as soon as possible so that he can quit this demoniac body and go back home, back to Godhead. That will be our topic matter for next Monday. Kind of a cliffhanger, huh? We leave you guys hanging there. All right, you'll have to tune in order to find out what happened. Okay. Some or other, my screen is allowing me either Facebook or Zoom. I'm not seeing both. So let's hear from Rob first. What takeaways or what thoughts or anything, any way you want to wrap this up. And then I'll switch to the Facebook and say hello. And you guys in Facebook, you have an opportunity here while we're listening to Rob to write any really interesting comments. I know Britt has already got a couple on there. So Rob, what say you, my man?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Excellent storytelling, leaving us with a cliffhanger. We had no choice but to tune in on Monday.
Did you get a chance to make any little poetic ditties out of it?
Yeah, here we go. We're too small to fill it all, but Krishna can overflow all that you know.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Krishna's love is abundant and eternal, not maternal or paternal.
Mm, mm. Well, it does have some, he is paternal and maternal. He is.
Not materially, though.
Not materially, no, not at all. Yeah.
The entire existence would stand still if not for Krishna's supreme will.
Perfect.
Treat everyone with respect. Krishna is in every little speck. Don't be mixed, be fixed.
The muse is alive and well within you this morning. Thank you so much.
Only thanks to you, Prabhuji.
Thanks to Prabhupada. Okay, let me hit Chrome here and see if we can get Facebook back. Okay. All right. The screen's going this way and that way. So Britta is never, never take Britta for granted. She always has really, really insightful, interesting ways of seeing things and creative ways of expressing herself. She says, whoops, what happened here? First of all, let's acknowledge Brent. First one to drop in. Bye, Bobby. She says, nice backdrop, the temple in Spanish fork with the sun rising. Britta's first comment is Hare Krishna, followed by Jean with his pranams, emoji pranams. Now Britta's comment here is, boy, my brother sure is going through sheer hell because his soon-to-be ex-wife is unsatisfied with his inability to be all things to her. Godless marriages are doomed to fall. Yeah, that's exactly what we're saying. One particle cannot meet the expectations of another particle. Only the source, only the supreme personality of Godhead can make marriages work. Thank you for supporting that assertion of ours. Good morning, Govinda Dev. Govinda Dev is freshly returned from Chicago, where he is bestowed with the sacred thread, the Yagya Pavitra, around his torso, and he can legitimately now worship the deities, cook for the deities, perform pujas, even including up to weddings. Did you know that, Govinda Dev? Now you're an authorized celebrant. That means you can perform weddings, among other things. Manasa Ganga, thank you very much. She sent me a text yesterday talking about some of her training, how it is that she got the skills to become a painter. And Britta says, misery definitely has a way of making one remember what's most important. Yes. In the demoniac species, Vrtrasura is going to have the important things right in front of him, whereas in the heavenly planets, Indra has forgotten those things which are most important. Sukshma, who crisscrosses the country as a professional driver, says, Hare Krishna to all from the Arizona desert. Jean, edge of your seats. Yeah, hopefully we left you suspensefully waiting for the next installment, which is not going to be forthcoming for another several days. All right, thank you very much. Have a great rest of your week. Have a great weekend. It's going to be Christmas, celebration of a pure devotee, the appearance day of a pure devotee. Have a happy, holy Christmas. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.